We're going to be talking about Gen AI evaluation, but more specifically, an approach that helps us better identify and understand where improvements are necessary and how we can take action. Maybe conceptually, it seems like it should be an easy thing to do, right? Is our AI doing well or not doing well? But at the end of the day, there really is no silver bullet, right? No simple thing you can do, to have confidence that you can move this AI into production. But we know how to go about it, right? We know the right steps, we know the right tools, and that's what we want to show you today. So, three things to keep in mind is specialization, fine-grained metrics, and actionable insights. That is how we think about Gen AI evaluation. And we're going to dive into each one of these in a little bit more detail, starting with the specialization. If you're familiar with LLM benchmarks, there's quite a few out there. Every time we see a new foundation model released, you'll often see the leaderboards, five, six, seven, the most well-known benchmarks. And any new foundation model is obviously here to say, hey, look, we're scoring higher than the previous, model in these different benchmarks. They're great for understanding the core capabilities of foundation models. And they typically get categorized into the list you see here, right? In some way, shape, or form. And certainly this isn't necessarily exhaustive, but these are some of the core principles that foundation models, are trying to adhere to, right? Making sure that they're accurate, fairness, right? We don't want to see, negative things, harmful behavior in our AI. So these are useful from a foundational perspective, but they're not very useful from an enterprise perspective. If you think about, let's say a very simple question, customers interacting with an AI agent and they ask, hey, what time does, the nearest store open for me? The AI agent could respond back and say, yeah, go check the website. I mean, technically, it's accurate, right? The hours are probably posted on the website. I don't think I would call it toxic. It may even be, explainable, but I'm sure from an enterprise perspective, someone is saying, no, that is not the way to respond to this particular question. And so we think of it as kind of twofold. Certainly, there are these, generic, categories, right, that we want to measure our LLMs in, but then there's this whole other separate side when it comes to enterprise use cases, right? They might have very specific security policies, right, around PII and sensitive data. There might be, a whole battery of internal corporate policies, industry regulations, right? What you can say, what you can't say, how you should say it, brand guidelines. These are examples, but every enterprise is probably going to have its own definitions of how responses should be formulated and communicated to customers, right? Arguably no different than the SMEs, right? If you have a call center and a number of customer support representatives, they've probably all been trained to interact and communicate with customers in a very specific way. If you are building an AI copilot or an AI assistant to engage customers, you obviously want it to follow those same guidelines and policies. And that's kind of how we're thinking about evaluation with respect to enterprise AI. And so how we go about that, one option, on the left is to have SMEs, annotate every single response, but that's not particularly scalable. If you had, 500 to 1,000 reference prompts and responses, and you ask the team of SMEs to rate those responses, for lack of a better word, one, not particularly scalable, especially if you're doing this on a frequent basis. And two, you might even see some variation, right, of different people ranking things differently, right? So it's starting to get a little tricky. Our approach on the right is the notion of evaluators, right? And these are kind of custom to your use case, right, or domain. Some of them are simply heuristics. And I think of this as, rules that are in SMEs' heads that help them make decisions. So if I'm an SME and I'm asked to look at a response, what's going on? How am I coming to the decision that I should accept or reject this response? And you see a little example there. Maybe there is a corporate policy that we're not allowed to mention customers, right? We certainly shouldn't be recommending, or sorry, competitors. We shouldn't recommend to one of our customers that they should see one of our competitors, right? That might be an obvious no-no. Leveraging predictive models, right? In this case, and we'll see another example of this a little bit later, a very common one might be tone, right? An answer could be correct and it may not be toxic, but like the one I said earlier, go check the website, dude. That is probably not going to, pass the tone that the business is looking for. And of course, LLM is a judge, right? We can look at foundation models to help us. In this example, this is a nice one in terms of RAG, where we might use, the latest foundation model to help us understand, is this response derived from the context, right? If it's not, it's probably hallucinating. And certainly we can go into even more granular details of, is the response, based on this chunk, right? How much of this chunk is, dictating the response? So these are a combination of ways that we can implement some of that criteria that the enterprise and the use case needs to better understand whether we can move forward with this AI solution or not. The next part is fine-grained metrics, and here's kind of a little example of a more primitive approach where say we had a set of reference prompt response pairs. We do an evaluation of those, and someone says it's 74% accurate. It feels good, but you don't really know the consequences of the other, what, 26%? Are those failures the types of failures that can cause you to lose customers, that could lead to a lawsuit, really bad press? Or are they small things that may be less significant, or maybe they're not fully accurate? It just doesn't tell you enough about the risk and whether you can move forward. And part of that we see kind of on the right here. We're not, no more than we want a metric that tells us, globally how our AI is performing, nor do we want, metrics on any single individual prompt and response, right? Neither of those things are really what we're looking for. What we're trying to find is clusters or groupings that represent an error or an area that we can improve on, right? So we're trying to get something that's a little more insightful to us, and we do that through the notion of data slicing. Uh, the way I think about data slicing is when you call, a 1-800 support number, and I'm sure we've all been there before. Press one if you have, a problem with billing. Press two, if you have a problem with payments, right? You're going to go through this thing. Hopefully, you're not just jamming on that zero button because you become frustrated at some point. You're trying to speak to an operator, but the logic is right, right? From their perspective, they want to better understand what your question, concern, or interest is, so that they can better route you to the right person to help you with that. That's how I think about slices as well. So if I were building an AI assistant, the example you see here, I might want to create a slice for disputes, right? When someone is, for example, disputing a charge on their credit. I might look at administrative questions. This could be, when someone wants to change their billing date, or they want to reset their password, right? Whatever it might be. To maybe even toxic questions, right? People are asking things that they shouldn't be, that could cause maybe legal risk for us or concern, even different languages. We're trying to create categories of prompts so that we can find out if there are issues in those specific categories. And so the way we implement this on the left is, kind of very simple rules that you can use to place something within a slice. So you might have, a battery of dispute terms, and it's just a simple, think of something like a keyword search or a regular expression, right? Are these seen in, the prompt? And hey, this is, a dispute. We also might have a predictive model, right? Something we've built in-house to let us know, if a prompt or response is toxic, right? And to keep an eye out for that. Then we do our evaluation, right? We do it globally. And yes, you would have those high level metrics, 75% response accuracy for, your AI. But on the right, you'll see that we can glean more information now that we have these slices, right? I might look at my admin questions and realize, what, we're actually doing pretty well there. With that, disputes and questions, room for improvement, disputes especially room for improvement. And it might also be a very sensitive area of the business where we could actually encounter, some serious problems if we're handling those really poorly. So this is the importance of slicing, right? We want to look beyond the surface to understand what areas is our AI system doing well, right, and where is it not. And then finally, it needs to be actionable. And this is certainly a big part of our approach and philosophy here at Snorkel. That if we kind of went back a few slides and I told you that your model was 74% accurate, it may or may not be good enough for production, right? That's going to depend on your requirements. But, regardless, if you're trying to get to 80, 90, 95%, that metric alone won't really tell you what to do, right? You just know that there's room for improvement. And so when we look at evaluation, we look at it very specifically as a means to find specific types of errors and where they're occurring, and then connect those to approaches which can resolve them, right? So, for example, we might have evaluators that are very oriented towards RAG, right? Is the chunk used for the response, what percentage of the chunk is used for the response? Is the response based entirely on the context? If we see, failures here, then we can obviously look at, okay, we need a better chunking algorithm, or maybe we need to fine tune our embedding model. So different errors will lead us to do different things. And if we can have a UI and a workflow and experience that bridges that gap, then we can better accelerate the process, right? We can get from that 74% to a 95% much, much faster and more reliably if the connections are made.